We have brought a question before the throne of the Most High. YHWH. What is the central misunderstanding of David Bentley Hart in your sacred word? The 100-verse counsel opens with 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 21, and the mathematical signature confirms a clear answer. The verdict is yes, an affirmative discovery. The probability of yes is 99.9%, with 0.1 unresolved. The Spirit is speaking with precision, and we must now hear what he says. The lead verse declares, "In the law it is written, with people of other dialects and other lips will I speak to this people, and still, for all that will they not hear me, says YHWH." David Bentley Hart has devoted his learning to the other dialects, the fine textures of Koine Greek, and lexical arguments. He handles the sacred text with philological skill, yet the Spirit testifies that he does not hear. In the Hebraic mind, hearing is covenantal attention and obedience, not mere acoustic reception. The central misunderstanding is not linguistic but spiritual. He listens to the other lips but refuses the voice of the God who binds himself to a particular people, land, and priesthood. The mathematical signature shouts through the dominion triad. Identity, inheritance, and priesthood appear in concentrations nearly 10 times the baseline. The Spirit highlights the very pillars Hart dissolves. The drawer gives us Joseph, alone in the house, as recorded in Genesis chapter 39, verse 11. A set-apart man in a foreign land, defined by covenant loyalty. Then Psalm 74, verse 22 cries, "Arise, O Elohim, plead your own cause, remember how the foolish man scorns you daily." The foolish man scoffs at covenant distinction. The assembly in Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 2 is called an assembly of treacherous people who break faith. Identity is forged in fidelity to YHWH, not generic human unity. Hart melts this set-apart people into a universal mass, missing that the treasure stored up for the last days, spoken of in James chapter 5, verse 3, belongs to those who keep the covenant. Then the inheritance. Psalm 105, verse 11 rings out, saying, "To you I will give the land of Canaan, the lot of your covenant inheritance." This is not a metaphor for a disembodied afterlife. It is a concrete geophysical promise. Yet Numbers chapter 20, verse 12 shows Moses and Aaron barred from that very land because they did not believe and consecrate YHWH before the children of Israel. The land is so real that unbelief forfeits entry. Exodus chapter 6, verse 8 calls it a priestly inheritance, given by the uplifted hand of YHWH to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The drawer brings Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11, where Adonai promises to recover the remnant from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and the islands of the sea. Hart treats territorial promises as primitive symbols allegorized away by a Hellenized spiritual gospel. The Bible reads forward from particular election to a restored creation. The land is not dissolved into myth. Priesthood marks the third pillar. Leviticus chapter 12, verse 6 prescribes the sin offering at the entrance of the priestly tabernacle. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 21 shows the ritual sprinkling of blood upon the tabernacle and all vessels of service. Ezekiel chapter 48, verse 11 speaks of the priests, the sons of Zadok, who kept the charge of YHWH and went not astray when Israel and the Levites went astray. Then comes the sharp rebuke in Ezekiel chapter 44, verses 6 and 7. YHWH says to the house of Israel, "Let it suffice you of all your abominations, in that you have brought in the sons of the foreigner, uncircumcised in heart and flesh, to be in my sacred place, to pollute it." Hart's universal inclusion, while claiming to magnify grace, removes the distinction between the consecrated and the profane, breaking the covenant pledge. The direct hits cut to the root. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 4 declares, "They will turn away their ears from the covenant truth, and will be turned to fiction." Hart's account of universal reconciliation demands that passages of final judgment, like the Valley of Hamongog in Ezekiel chapter 39, verse 11, or the red dragon destruction in Revelation chapter 12, verses 3 and 4, must be read as metaphorical. This turns covenant truth into myth. Romans chapter 11, verse 6 insists, "And if by sacred grace, then is it no more of works, otherwise grace is no more grace." Hart rightly stresses grace, but his system makes faith an automatic byproduct of metaphysical necessity, subtly reinserting works by nature. The drawer calls for obedience and bearing fruit, as in Romans chapter 1, verse 5, for obedience to the faith among all nations for his name. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 12 summons, let them give glory to YHWH and declare his praise in the islands. Hart's apophatic universalism dissolves the divine name into an impersonal absolute. But the draw pulses with YHWH, Elohim, Adonai YHWH, the living, choosing, covenant-keeping King. Even the Book of Enoch cries out in Enoch chapter 9, verse 3, bring our cause before the Most High, Lord of Lords, Elohim of Elohim, King of Kings. The Spirit weaves a thread concerning the stumbling block of particularity. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23 says, but we herald Messiah crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block and to the Greeks foolishness. Hart stumbles over the Jewish particularity of the cross and the covenant. He seeks wisdom sophisticated to the Greeks, but does not bow before the scandal of election. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 12 shows the apostolic strategy, that I may cut off occasion from them that desire occasion, that where they glory, they may be found even as we. Hart glories in universalist logic, but the apostles glory in the covenant faithfulness of the Messiah. The draw presents the covenant lawsuit form. 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 7 calls the people to stand still and reason before YHWH of all his covenant faithful acts. The sacred word is a treaty document, a covenant lawsuit and renewal. Hart reads it as a story of all souls eventually returning to the divine, a cosmic homecoming. But the Bible is the record of YHWH's legal dealings with his chosen household, leading to the restoration of Israel and the ingathering of the nations through that covenant channel. The woman in Luke chapter 8, verse 47 testified publicly how she was healed, her personal encounter with the covenant Messiah, not an abstract principle. The mathematical verdict seals this witness. The Dominion triad normalized relative increase of over 900%, the sigma of 5.85, the affirmative polarity with a p-value less than 1 in 100, all 6 content channels active with a combined p-value in the order of 10 to the negative 9th, confirm a discoverer-level event. It is the Spirit shouting through the text. The exact pillars Hart's theology implicitly dissolves are the pillars YHWH intends to highlight. The answer is yes. There is a central misunderstanding. So we stand on this drawn counsel and give the plain answer. The central misunderstanding of David Bentley Hart in the sacred word is his systematic refusal to hear the covenantal, Israel-centered voice of YHWH. He hears the other dialects and other lips, the Greek subtleties, but does not hear the God who binds himself to the seed of Abraham, to the land of Canaan as a priestly inheritance, to a consecrated priesthood, and to a covenant that carries everlasting distinctions. He turns Torah into failed pedagogy, the land into a disposable symbol, the election of Israel into a temporary phase, and judgment into therapeutic myth. He reads the sacred word as a universalist epic instead of a covenant lawsuit. And for all his other lips, he still will not hear what the Spirit says to the assemblies. This is the testimony of the 100-verse counsel. Let him who has ears to hear, hear. The verses drawn in this Shield 17.11 session were 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 21. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 23. Revelation chapter 10, verse 11. 1 Samuel chapter 7, verse 16. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 12. Psalms chapter 74, verse 22. This concludes today's interpretation under the Shield Protocol.